Welcome. I'm Michael Dennin, Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning and Dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education here at UC Irvine. And this is Conversations with the Vice Provost, where I sit down with colleagues from around the university to discuss issues of importance to the community, the larger community of Orange County, the state of California, the nation, and I even like to say the world. And it is very exciting for me to have with us today Professor Brett Sanders from Civil and Environmental Engineering, and more importantly, a neighbor and fellow soccer parent.
Hey, yeah. Nice to be here, Mike. I'm really happy to join you.
Yeah, I think the first thing I really want to jump into is we've talked a lot about teaching, education, the impact of different things, and recently you've shared with me some thoughts around kind of the impact of being an engineering student, but more importantly, what type of student, like what type of person they could be after they graduate with their engineering degree and where it should take them. And this idea of kind of being a problem solver versus an information gatherer, I think is an incredible, separation of ideas. So I don't know if you want to first maybe say a few words about how you see the two, and then maybe even throw in like how you came up with that sort of distinction.
Sure. Yeah, so in the School of Engineering, we tend to see a lot of students coming in who are very eager to go off and find that first job and sort of have that success. And so they're really looking for sort of an inventory of things that they can put on their resume to say that I have these skills, I have these abilities, I want to get that first job. And I think part of that's our campus culture, as many first-gen students here are really thinking about engineering as a pathway to that successful career. And they see that successful career coming with that first job.
Yep,
Makes perfect sense, right? But what seems to sort of have developed along with that, though, is this a little bit of a information gatherer mindset.
Okay.
Which is that me as a learner, I want to make sure I've found the key things I need to know, and I know where to find them.
Right.
So if I have this type of problem, I know that there's information here, and if I have this type of problem, I know there's information there. But what we're seeing is that tends to encourage students to think at a more shallow level. Right? So as opposed to thinking deeply about processes, first principles, how things work, what they spend time and energy doing is just making sure they know where they can find different things. So we've had some discussions about ways we can kind of battle this, and another way we've thought about it is a drifting away from like a first principles type thinking, where and it maybe also comes with sort of our transition from being sort of a theory-driven world to a data-driven world, right? Or in terms of learning, in terms of how we think about understanding. But what I've tried to do is really try to let students think about why that sort of systems thinker type mindset is also going to be really valuable in the long run, which has to do with their ability to tackle more complex problems.
Now, when we talk about that, what I like about it, right, is the complex problems for many of our students are what motivate them also and get them excited. I mean, I've just seen this in the LA Times articles, on my Twitter feed and all over. We keep hearing that the younger generation is actually into solving problems and giving back to their community. And many of our studies show our first-gen students, yes, they want that first job, they want to transform their family situation, they want to move forward, but many of them are also thinking about it in terms of giving back to their community. So I love this idea of a problem solver. When you think about when you're trying to motivate the students, are there some obvious, sort of big unsolved problems you use to kind of show them, like, okay, this is what a problem solver is doing and why it's not just something you can find in a textbook and why you have to be more systems thinking? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think those problems are different across the School of Engineering.
Right.
We have, programs in materials and programs in biomedical systems and programs in mechanical and aerospace. In my field, in civil and environmental engineering, one of the things I'm thinking a lot about is the fact that we have a lot of infrastructure along the Southern California coastline. We know that climate is changing, that sea level is rising, that precipitation may become more extreme. And we're also learning about the sort of different communities that are exposed to flooding and how some are greater capacity than others to deal with the consequences, and then even more about what governments need to do to try to support those communities and provide some backstops when those disasters happen. And what increasingly I think about is how these are complicated problems that go well beyond engineering. You know,
Right.
it's sort of, we think about, you know, designing infrastructure and managing infrastructure, but we think about the urban planning that has to take place, the policies that government has to form, the physical sciences and chemical and biological sciences that are important. And all of a sudden you think, gosh, there's a lot of interconnected pieces here. So how do I get a student, you know, prepared to deal with that type of a bigger challenge? And that's where just getting past like this information gathering mode is really crucial. We can't just sort of think about parking pits of knowledge, that we need someone who really can anticipate these problems coming. So when they serve their clients and they design a system, they really have a design that has, you know, longer lasting impact.
So when you first started this, I believe you shared with me it was inspired by getting your class started actually this quarter. Was there something particular that triggered you to say, oh wait, this is how I can share it with my students and get them to realize this choice between being a problem solver and information gatherer?
Well,
or did it just come to you?
Okay, so I teach fluid mechanics every fall,
Yeah.
and every year, you know, I'm just rethinking, how do I do the best job, you know, educating these students?
Right.
How do I need to change to try to offer a better class? And this year it was just a bit of reflection, you know, where I just thought that I needed to sort of try to get more buy-in from the students, that there was a more challenging path worth taking.
Right.
That extra time spent learning, understanding things at a deeper level, seeing how pieces connected, how to approach a problem, not just sort of solve one type of problem, but how do you approach more complicated problems and lean on key concepts like, you know, mass conservation, energy, momentum, you know, thermodynamics. How do we like lean on these key concepts and then tailor them to different types of applications? So if you can learn that type of skill, you're preparing yourself for any type of problem in the future. And so it was a sort of, I guess, a decision that comes from just year after year of looking at student evaluations that say, solve more examples. Show me more examples of how to solve every possible problem so that I can put that in my memory banks and be prepared for that in the future. And I just felt like I had to try to motivate the students on the grounds that there's going to be problems that aren't there, that haven't been solved before, and you want to be prepared to tackle them.
And what I like about your process, I think something you highlight, which I say a lot to students, is this idea about asking the right questions versus having the right answer. And I feel like, I don't know what your reaction is, but I feel like we tend to fight sort of 12 years of education at K through 12. Not that I want to blame everything on K through 12, because I have many high school teachers in my family, so I support the K through 12 system and it's doing great.
Right.
But there is, I think the way the system's designed to get you through K through 12 and get you into college, there is a lot about getting the right answer, and there's a lot of penalty in K through 12 there tends to be for getting wrong answers versus being a question asker. Right. And I know the good teachers do that, and I know it's there, but the system, I think, seems to fight against that a little bit.
No, I agree. And as a university, right, we admit students based on GPA, and so we send the signal that your grades are the most important thing. And students are very energy efficient. They figure out, well, to do well in this test, if I could see those test problems ahead of time and know exactly how I won't make any dumb mistakes. So it kind of comes from a lot of conditioning, for sure. So it just, it takes effort to kind of rewire the students, and also I think it's also a resource issue, right? Do we have the resources we need to give students feedback on their learning process, where they made mistakes in their thinking, or do we only have the resources to determine whether something's right or wrong? Yeah. And if what we're doing is just telling them that it's wrong and not telling them that their thinking was right or wrong, then we're not necessarily helping them the way they need to be helped to learn the way we want them to learn.
Exactly. Well, this is where I can make a great advertisement. Okay. Before we transition to my next question. One of the reasons I've been pushing learning assistants, these undergraduate learning assistants, and active learning, I hadn't realized until about 2 weeks ago, it's the difference between parallel processing on feedback and serial processing. Right? Right now, the traditional ways of giving feedback is always grading homework, which is fundamentally serial, right? You have to do each student individually, and you write a comment if you're really going to give feedback. And that's always going to have trouble scaling, right? This is why we invented parallel processing in computers, right? If you think about active learning and group work, if you have a team of people walking around a room where students are doing things live, you're parallel processing and getting the information because you're listening to multiple things pretty quickly. But you also have that opportunity because most students make mistakes in clusters, right? It's some make unique and individual.
You can penetrate
mistakes,
the cluster.
but often it's this one mistake is made by almost everybody, and you take a 5-minute pause and you explain the one mistake instead of having to write it on 100 pieces of paper. So for people looking for efficiency and feedback.
No, I became very aware of the Learning Assistance program the last year or so as it kind of took a grip in engineering. And it seems like an excellent addition to the school. And not only are we helping those undergraduates, but we also help develop more leaders, right?
Yes.
So we have students who have this experience teaching other people, leading groups. And so it seems like it's impacts at different levels all at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's kind of cool. So in the spirit of advertising and impacting students, I know you've piloted one summer of Siripods, if I have the name right. You want to just say a little bit about that and the idea and how that's going?
Yeah, absolutely. So like most schools on campus, we have a lot of research going on, and we have students who are messaged by our staff, by our faculty, come to UCI, get involved in research. We're a research university, you can get research experience, it'll get you ready for graduate school, it'll help you sort of find out what you want to do. And interestingly though, we had no front door for research. We didn't teach any research skills. And when we do encourage undergrads to do research, the most common thing we do is put them into research tasks where they have very little understanding of the broader research questions, and they're not really, understanding what frames this particular question, why am I doing this, and so you're kind of thrown into something, and it may not even make the best impression upon you. It may not motivate you to want to do research.
Right.
So the primary sort of, I think, an instigator for this initiative was to say, you know what, we want to have more of our domestic students going to our graduate schools. We want more of our undergrads excited about research. Why aren't we creating a front door that gives them the skills to do research, that teaches them how to do a literature review, that tells them how to frame a question, that tells them how to write a professional email and set up a meeting with a professor? We don't do it. We're a professional school, yet so many of those professional soft skills are missing from our educational system. So what we wanted to do was create a summer experience after sophomore year. So they've gone through a couple of years, they've been exposed to some key concepts, but they're just getting into the sweet spot where they have 2 years left where they can sort of get involved in a research lab. What if we prepared them right then in the summer before their junior year with a set of skills like going on Google Scholar and researching papers, and we taught them how to use Overleaf to write a technical note using a template from a journal. So they start learning to write. We taught them how to make quality graphics in MATLAB and sort of vector graphics and raster graphics, and the difference between the two in terms of text quality and things like that. So we made them publishers, and we made them sort of typesetters, and we showed them how to research literature and create a bibliography. And so we just gave them all these basic skills, which incidentally faculty are left having to do individually in a sort of a haphazard way across the whole school, right?
Yep.
So what if we as a school could create this sort of gateway, this starting point, which gives the students abilities to do research, and then they can start taking advantage of campus resources like undergraduate research program, and be just a launching point.
What I think is great about that, Brett, something you said, and I experienced this a couple times in physics, is we tried to do certain things in courses exactly along those lines in certain ways, even for our grad students. Many of my colleagues, this was a while ago, I think they may have changed their view, were saying things like, no, that's the individual mentor's job. Oh, why are you making a class? I learned that on my own. And I think part of something you said at the beginning, I think some of our current faculty forget that our current students are a different sort of distribution. We're very proud at having half of our students be first in their family to be in college. I was not first in my family. And I remember leaving as a freshman and my dad saying, you need to talk to your professors, you need to find out if they have work for you to do. And I got a lot of advice from my family because they knew the ins and outs. My kids are getting that same advantage. And yes, I had advisors who sort of showed me how to do literature searches. Usually it wasn't the advisor, it was another grad student or someone more senior. But again, I tended to be sometimes at smaller places or already embedded in the research group. And I think all of these skills really are ones we just have to face the fact that we can't rely anymore on individual faculty doing. We have to do it at scale in some sort of system like what you're doing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's a perfect match for UCI's sort of stature as a campus. It's attracting all these first generation students, and no one at their homes is saying, you should think about getting a PhD. Right. No, they're not hearing that at home. And they're not hearing that you can get a really high-paying job if you get a research, a higher right. education degree. And there's great jobs in research. Research is, and actually I'll add that as part of our summer experience, we have an exercise where they research their career opportunities in the area where they're doing a pod. So we had pods. One pod was in contaminants associated with wildfires. One pod was associated with sort of virtual reality in medical right. treatment. And the third pod had to do with decarbonization pathways. Okay, so we said, look, you're in these pods. If you had a graduate degree, what kind of job could you get? And so they all went out and they researched different jobs out there, and they figured out what the qualifications were and what the salaries were. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, I now have my checklist of something else I can shoot for. And look, these starting salaries are $90,000, whatever it might be. Yeah. And that looks better than the $60,000 job that I get with a bachelor's degree or whatever it might be. Yeah. And also I need to know this software package. I need to have this type of experience. And so they start seeing where they need to take their career, not from us telling them, but from them right. seeing what was really out there and what the market's offering them.
And what I think is really important for some of our faculty colleagues to really understand, which I think they do, but not always explicitly, is none of this work where we're helping them, whether the first part of our conversation, are you a problem solver or information gathering, when you have them research what type of jobs they would get, the fact that we help our students understand what their career can be is in no way contradictory or takes away from the fact that we are here about research and education. I think sometimes if you use the word job in a sentence, there are still people who think you're just becoming, somehow a technical school, which is not true at all, right? All of us wanted a job when we graduated. That's just part of going to college, and they're not mutually exclusive. And it sounds like you're integrating it in a really good way.
Well, just from experience, we know that students are coming into our degrees because they are eager to get their job. They're eager to learn the tasks that they need to get that first job. And we're really battling the opposite issue, which is that, you're missing something by not sort of thinking about first principles and basic right. concepts and that ability to think big, think about systems and how things are interconnected. So our experience is that these students are driven for jobs.
Well, yeah, no, the right? students are. Yeah. And I think to your point, but what the students are missing is an even better and more fulfilling job because they're not noticing That's the right. education piece. So it's not that the education piece is decoupled from the search for the job. You can take their passion for a job and get them connected to the education piece instead of trying to keep them so separate and in vacuums.
And I'll add one more thing, which is that we know that we have a whole distribution of students with different abilities, right. different aspirations. And so we also want to be a place where those students that want to be information gatherers and be really good at that can find success. Yeah, and those students that want to be the big problem solvers and tackle the toughest problems can pursue their aspirations too. And I think we can do that.
No, I think that's great because we all know, look, you ended up in engineering, I ended up in physics. We don't all have the same interests, but we can serve a wide range of students. But speaking of interest and sort of a theme that came, I think, across the first two parts, there is often a sense among our students, I think they both have a drive, I think these days, for having an impact on their community, a social impact, an impact on society. But I think there also still is that stereotype of, engineers just do engineering, biologists just do biology, and really the social impact, the social issues, even the ethics of it necessarily don't come into it. But I think they care about it, they just don't realize or know how to bring it in. And I think something you and I have talked a lot about is, we don't just want scientists who can solve problems. We want them to be ethical. We want them to understand the social implications. You already alluded to this. A lot of your challenges in your field deal with larger questions of what are the right government regulations, how are communities impacted disproportionately, and so on.
Yep. Well, two things come to mind in this context. One is that our accreditation process requires that we teach students with a broader educational awareness of social and environmental issues. Okay,
Right.
so we have an educational mandate to incorporate those dimensions. And the second thing is that we felt in our school just a groundswell of interest in broader social and environmental issues over the last couple of years, as we had Black Lives Matter type protests taking place. We were sort of challenges with COVID, and people are separated, and we just had all these sort of challenges that came before us, and we had students just saying, we need to be talking more about these issues and challenging the faculty more to talk about it. And I think the campus as a whole has done a really good job of sort of elevating the sort of this topic as a conversation piece, topics like racism and especially. And so that is happening in our schools. And I like the way it seems to be distributed, where each group is sort of having conversations and thinking about what makes sense to them. I can say what I did in my class this year, which has been kind of an experiment. I think it's gone fairly well, but I was personally like over the last couple of years, I've taken a much deeper interest in Bob Dylan music than I ever did before. Okay, right. And so as I dove in, I started listening to songs like Hurricane, which was written in the 70s about Reuben Carter, who was a boxer who was framed for a murder in New Jersey and served years and years and years in prison. And I just found myself really more deeply attuned to the fact that these issues of racism haven't changed in many ways. We've been facing a lot of these same problems for a long time. We just haven't been talking about them. And also, as I kept moving through sort of Bob Dylan music, I just found all these really quotes that I just found so inspirational. Like there's one quote. He says, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows," and to me, that's also integrates with my research, because I think we're these scientists, and we can come along and we can sort of say something about this problem or that problem, come in with authority. But you know what? The people we're working with have a lot of knowledge too.
Right.
And it's really easy for us to kind of come across as arrogant or having the right answers. But the reality is we don't have all the right answers. We can bring a sophisticated set of tools. We can facilitate a lot of these conversations about how we manage sort of infrastructure and environment, or how we deal with flooding, or what we should do about sea level rise. But I just try to keep that quote in mind. Like, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. And I share that with my students. You can develop this technical knowledge, but be careful not to think that you have all the answers, right? You have the ability to work with people to solve problems.
And I love that idea of working, local people have knowledge and experience that we don't have.
Exactly.
And even just going back to, the lots of the ways and knowledge inherent in Indigenous peoples and what they know about their area and the world around them and how they understand nature. It's a complement, and it's a powerful thing to work together really in true partnerships, rather than, as you said, us coming in and thinking we know all the answers.
And you mentioned Indigenous peoples. Just circling back to Bob Dylan, he sang a song called "The Battle of Ira Hayes," which is, he didn't write that song. It was written, I can't remember the writer of it, but it talks about Ira Hayes, who was a member of the Pima Indian tribe, and basically the Pima tribe, this was in I think the 30s and 40s, had their water rights taken away, and they couldn't farm and they couldn't survive. Right. And Ira Hayes joined the Marine Corps. And maybe you know this story.
No, but okay. I'm fascinated. Keep going. Yeah. Okay,
so Ira Hayes joined the Marine Corps, and then he ended up being one of the Marines that lifted the flag at Iwo Jima.
Okay.
After hundreds and hundreds of Marines were killed, he was one of the survivors and held up the flag. And I think after that, I think the military made somewhat of a token of him as saying, we have this Native American, he's fighting for America, and lifted the flag. But he sadly wasn't so, content and happy, and he died not long after the war from alcoholism. Mm-hmm. And it's just a story that hasn't gone away. So we're working with the Big Pine Paiute tribe in Owens Valley, and they've had their water taken away by LA Department of Water and Power, and so their soil is no longer wet. They can't grow food. They've lost land, and they're still battling for water rights in Owens Valley so they can live a life that is, better. And so we as Southern Californians, we import water from Owens Valley, and we take their water. And so what I was trying to do as an instructor is say, our lifestyle here in Southern California is with water that is, having an impact on, Native peoples in Northern California and in Owens Valley. And it's just part of that's just raising awareness and sort of just having that conversation. And then we can talk about things like, as a civil engineer, we now have state laws that say that projects that impact Native peoples need to have conversations with those peoples.
Right.
And so we can teach them, when you have a civil engineering project and you need to sort of think there might be an impact, you're going to need to consult with tribes, and this is how you might be able to do that. So we're trying to embed things in those sorts of ways to create a more well-rounded engineer. And obviously we meet the ABET requirements, but we also just, I think, are going to create just better engineers for the future.
That is great. And again, it also models the idea that we really need to be listening and learning. As people who have these privileges around us, we need to really be reflecting on them and figuring out where they come from and then how to move forward from there. I think that's awesome, Brett. It's amazing. This is a good insight into what's happening in engineering at the ground level, and a lot of ways of engaging with our students. And I think for the faculty listening, I think this is a good model for ways. I loved one of the comments you said. You got all these teaching evaluations from the students, and you did something in response to it. And it isn't always giving the students what they want, right? They were talking about wanting more examples. I do have to share, it made me remember the funniest teaching eval I think I ever got, because I often get from students to do more examples in class.
Yeah, everyone gets do more
Everyone
examples.
Gets that.
Do more examples.
I also got from students to speak slower, which has always been a problem of mine. Yeah. It was interesting, the one student who wrote, Professor Dennin should go slower and do more examples in class. And so I was trying to figure out, did he just think this was a physics thing that I could actually go slower and do more examples? But it is kind of interesting sometimes what we get. Well, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure to join you in the chat today.
And hope you enjoyed this conversation. Look for many more, and thank you for watching.